Hi there, I'm Michelle Pascoe, and thank you for joining me in my podcast this week. Have you ever not been in a room and somebody has mentioned your name? What would be your first thought? Oh no, what did they say about me? Well, my guest today is certainly going to blow that myth all away because she is going to share an amazing story about exactly what happened when her name was mentioned in a room and how she has amplified that. My guest today is Michelle Baillie, the General Manager of SkyCity Entertainment Group from Hamilton in New Zealand. So let's start with the episode.
Hi, I'm Michelle Baillie. I'm the General Manager of SkyCity Hamilton in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I've been in the industry now for nearly 30, or actually just over 30 years. My goodness, well more than half my life. So it's been a really long time. SkyCity Hamilton is part of SkyCity Entertainment Group, and we've got four properties, three in New Zealand and one in Adelaide in South Australia. And we're one of five casinos in New Zealand. So I started in the industry when Christchurch Casino first opened. It was the very first one in the country, which opened in 1994. And I just finished a degree in political science and philosophy at the time, and was looking for work. And it just happened to be at the time when they were opening the casino. So a really exciting opportunity to join. And at the time, I didn't think I would be in the industry this long, but it has been amazing. And since being with Sky City, I've had 10 different roles across hotels, projects, gaming, and in general management positions in three different locations. So I didn't intend to join, but I've absolutely intended to stay.
And I love that framing. Yes, you didn't intend to join, but you've certainly intended to stay. And thank you just for that really quick snapshot on your amazing career, Michelle, because, as we flesh out this episode, it's really going to be looking at, how you got involved and how wonderful this industry is. Because I think that's the biggest thing is that people still see it, no matter where you are in the world, as a very transient, a job just to have for going to uni or a second car, a holiday, whatever it may be. But as you've proven over the years, there is so much opportunity to have a really well worthwhile career and just going from different areas, as you just mentioning then, business development into the growth into different areas within New Zealand itself is a wonderful opportunity for people to take note as we have this discussion today, but also as a woman in the casino and gaming industry. I'm just really honored to have you on here, Michelle. I know last year we met at the AGE here in Sydney in 2024, and there are a few women, but it would be lovely to see more. But it's actually sharing not just your personal story as a woman, but also sharing that story about being a leader in our industry and what that actually entails. So things can be lovely and glossy through our rose-tinted glasses at times, and it is wonderful when those things happen. But as we've seen in the past, and not just those big challenges, but those challenges that come upon us at different times, whether they're internal or external, but it's how we overcome them. So what are some unique challenges you have faced as a woman in leadership positions, Michelle, and how did you navigate these obstacles to achieve success?
Oh, yeah, thank you for that question. And there certainly have been challenges. I mean, I have stayed in the industry for a long time, and one of the reasons is the industry has actually changed, and which is something I'm really proud of. And I think more women in leadership roles have actually helped play a part in that change as well. One of the challenges I had, and I didn't think it was a challenge to start with, but all the examples of leaders I had were men in suits, and usually white men in suits. And we had terminology like be firm but fair, and that's how I acted. And when I was first became a leader, I was probably more a manager than a leader actually, because I was firm but fair, to the point when I was a completely different person at home than I was at work, because I was putting on a mask every time I went into my role to be what I thought a leader needed to be. And it took me a long time actually to realize you don't need to be like that, and you actually get a lot more out of people by working with them as a human being and connecting with them as a human being and trying to break down that hierarchy and actually letting them know about your vulnerability as well. So that's been something that once I opened myself up and knew that I didn't need to be perfect. I didn't need to know everything about everything. It's actually better to work with people and to utilize their knowledge and to work together and to be a bit vulnerable and to be a good human, that I actually felt I became a leader and not a manager. So that was absolutely one of those challenges, was just feeling I had to wear a mask.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the others, I mean, I certainly have experienced conscious and unconscious bias. So both of those things. Some of it's been very conscious. Like I've missed out on roles because I hadn't had children yet. I've been told I've been too emotional at times, as I'm sure every woman in a leadership position has. And I did also have an issue at one point where I found out I was being paid less than a male colleague. So to overcome those challenges, I was quite overt about talking about them once I grew up and became a leader instead of just a manager. Once I was comfortable that I might be making a career limiting move or a CLM, that I was brave enough to actually speak up, because fairness is quite a major trigger of mine. Once I got to know myself a bit better, I realised that. So I spoke up, and I think that's the best thing to do. And it's to do that factually if you can, to try and resolve those issues where there might be something that's inequitable. But one of the things where I think the industry has changed a lot, and SkyCity certainly has, and that we actually went through a process of opening our books, so to speak. So we actually were really open about looking at, where do we have a pay gap? Where do we have differences? Because sometimes they're not intended. And in my situation, it wasn't intended. It was because I had actually been an internal person working in the business for a long time, whereas the person that came in on more money was from outside and came in. So it wasn't intended, it just happened over time. So I think being really conscious about looking at where is the inequities by opening the books is really important. And something we've done at SkyCity is our gender pay gap now is 4%, when the national average in New Zealand, and as at September last year, was 8.9.
Wow.
So making some really great progress.
Yes, yes. And that's really, you've made some fantastic points there. It's first off, it's being vulnerable. And that always reminds me of the amazing Professor Brené Brown, when she did that TED talk many years ago about being vulnerable. And, I'm sure at the start of your career, it was still that, as you said, that mask of you can't show your team that to be vulnerable was to be weak, which is certainly not. What it does, it shows that you are real. and people can see through these masks, can't they? So, first off, that's wonderful that you saw it. And then taking that mask off, did you find that at times you got pushback from others around you saying, oh, if you show your vulnerability, you may be really spiraling into a downward pattern here. You're not going to have any more authority over your team. They're not going to respect you. Did you ever have that pushback at all, Michelle?
I had a wee bit of that, and I guess that's where that emotional comment came in from some people, is that sometimes through being vulnerable and being myself, that meant that, I wasn't as tough on my exterior as I'd been. I was actually, and it potentially was more emotional. But I think what it does, there might have been a bit of pushback. I don't think there is now, but I think what it does, it enables people to be themselves. And we talk about that in diversity policies a lot. We want people to bring their whole selves to work. Only way you can do that is to actually let them be themselves and understand that everybody's got a lot going on in their life that is a lot more than they show when they're actually at work. So I think that's incredibly important. And that whole saying, you can't be it if you can't see it. So even though some people may not like it all the time, I don't think it's a weakness. One of the comments I actually had, I did a course with Global Women New Zealand in 2015, and it was called Breakthrough Leaders, with 39 other women from across New Zealand. And one of the comments I got from another attendee at the end, we all had a notebook where they wrote notes about each other, was, you've proven that, Michelle, that you don't have to be a hard ass to succeed. And I love that. I really love that, because you don't. And I think it's really hard to be that person who's always trying to be tough all the time as well. You've got to, it's not sustainable. At some point you're going to crash and burn.
Or be really isolated with nobody around you.
Exactly. It's a lonely place to be.
And think, leadership roles can be lonely as it is, when you get to
Yeah,
those higher echelons of, well, who do I have around me that I can share my thoughts? But, I love that. You don't have to be that hard ass. You can be just you. And Michelle, that if you're demonstrating that, then how did you see your team reacting to it? Because I'm sure it wasn't like overnight. It was like, oh, well, I'm putting down that mask, putting on this one. But do you feel that as the days and weeks went on, that your team, did they ever give you some feedback or just share a comment on, oh my goodness, there's a deeper connection? Or did you ever feel that they realized that you were being more vulnerable and wanting to be, part of still managing and leading, but
yeah.
still being an understanding that you're all in this on this journey together?
Yeah, and I think it's important because you can still manage and lead. You can still have hard conversations. You
Mm.
can still achieve really good results through doing this. So, I think that's important. It's not about being soft, but it's about being genuine. And I think people do realize it. I went through a personal situation where one of my daughters wasn't very well, and I needed to have some time off to manage that, and it did impact me at work. And because you can't always be bright and breezy all the time. But what I did is I let my team know that that was happening, and I think that's really important because it
Mm.
also gave them permission when something wasn't going right to come to me and say, look, this isn't. I need some more time for this, or to deal with this personal
Yes.
situation. So I may not have got the direct feedback of we've noticed a change, but I've seen it in the actions and the way that people have been given permission to
Mm.
be able to take the time they need for themselves as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. And that's so important because there's always that say, work-life balance. Well, there is no such thing. I don't feel,
Mhm.
like
I agree.
if you're giving to one, there's going to be outweighing the
Yeah.
other. You try to do your very best. And that is through taking off that mask and thinking about, intentionally how you're going to move through the day, but then also how you're going to be with your family at home. And as you said, at home, you're very different to being in the workplace. And I think it's so important, and we see that more and more now, don't we, with our Gen Z, is that they will come to you and they'll tell you their life story, not just them, but others as well. And it's important to listen to that, but also to acknowledge that they're letting you know what's happening in their life. And then you can plan around it, can't you? Like, she said with you could have kept that inside you and thought, no, I'll be really stoic. But then, things happen, whether it's different visits, whatever the situation may be. So may have impacted on your role. And then everybody goes, oh,
Yeah.
what's happened to
That's right.
her?
Yeah.
What's wrong with Michelle? Instead of
Yeah.
being upfront right away.
Yeah.
And then people go, you know what? Well, if the CEO can do it, well, then so can we, and which is,
Mm.
I think, is fantastic. So
Yeah.
this all blends into that mentorship, and I'd love to hear about your journey as well, whether anybody along that journey has sort of really stood out, positive and negative, or negative, I shouldn't say and negative, but I think mentorship is so important. We look at coaches, particularly whether they're in business or at that C-suite level where they go externally out of their company.
Mm.
But mentorship, I feel, is very important and does play that crucial role. Could you just share perhaps a mentorship experience that had a significant impact on your leadership journey, either as a mentor or mentee? And how can we encourage more mentorship opportunities
Mm.
for aspiring women leaders in our industry?
Yeah, no, good questions. I mean, it can be really lonely once you get to a certain level. So I think it's important to reach out to people and form those networks. And we have some great networks through Global Gaming Women. I'm an international committee member of Global Gaming Women, and they offer some great mentorship programs as well. Some called Lean In Circles, which I was talking about at AGE last year, and really thrilled to say that we actually have them in Australia and New Zealand for the first time in 2025. So really excited about that. The thing that I think we all look at examples of people that you don't want to be. So you said
Mm.
of bad behavior. There's been a lot of those. So and I think if you remember how those situations make you feel, it can be a good leveler for how you act
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
If you remember how that made you feel. But I've had some amazing experiences and probably more sponsors rather than mentors
Mhm.
directly for me. When I was in Queenstown as a general manager, I hadn't been there very long, and I got pregnant with my third child, and I had a really supportive manager through that process. So before we had the flexible working, which came out of COVID for our industry, which has been a
Mm.
really good outcome of something that wasn't good,
Yeah.
I had really good support to have flexible working. I also had him, and it was a he, working in Auckland, who would speak about me positively when I wasn't in the room. And I think that's something we can do for
Yes.
each other, is
Mm.
to talk about each other positively when they're not there, and lift each other up rather than trying to compete with each other. But that is something that women sometimes do, is we get there and then we hold our space because it's been so hard to get there.
Mm.
The golden skirts or the queen bee. So I
Yeah.
think if we can actually speak favorably about each other and help each other and lift each other up, I think that's really important. So
Mm.
he was great for me, and he speaking positively about me when I wasn't in the room gave me the opportunity to step into a bigger role managing SkyCity Hamilton. So
Mm.
really appreciative of that. For me, mentoring, I've had a wonderful colleague who followed a similar journey to me, actually, used her transferable skills and moved out of gaming into a hotel role, and then came back into gaming in a more senior role. And that took a bit of courage to do that, stepping
Yeah.
into something that you don't know. But she did that, and she's amazing. And her name is Wendy, and she's now based in Auckland in another really a more senior role. And it's just been wonderful to see her succeed. So
Yeah.
again, it was giving her some good advice if she needed that, giving her that opportunity and encouraging her to take that opportunity, even though it was outside her comfort zone. And then again, speaking about her positively when she wasn't in the room and advocating for her to take this new role.
Mm.
So I think that's what we can do. I think it's finding someone to talk to that you trust. It's
Yeah.
important, finding a network that will support you, but then just being there to support other people rather than being there just for yourself.
Yes, yeah. I really love that about advocating for others when they're not in the room. And that is so important. But I think, first off, let's acknowledge that gentleman for doing that. And
Mm,
I think we're seeing more and more of that happen around the board table where people, actually acknowledge that and say, yeah, I fully support, whoever it may be. I'm there for them, all those conversations. But actually, even, as you said, you got that senior role, and perhaps that had come up in that discussion when you weren't there, but just putting your name forward and supporting that, I think that is wonderful. And then for you to show that then to Wendy, because isn't it interesting that we don't always see that potential in ourselves? It takes somebody else to really give us that little bit of a push over the edge to go, come on,
yeah,
just apply for that. And I think that's the thing as a woman, and I'm going to say this is a generalized statement because we can look at a lot of research, is that we want every one of those six boxes ticked before we'll go for the job, instead of perhaps a gentleman who would look at, oh, well, I've got three of them, but and I'll, I can learn on the job. And that's just part of us. If you look at research as being
yeah,
that woman, there's certainly a lot of women that take a lot of risks, but when I see that role, particularly as a leader, is to see that in potential in people, whether they're already at that senior level or those on the front line when they're just starting out, and showing
yeah,
them that this wonderful career is so important. But just having him there in your corner, it must have made a real difference, particularly about talking about you in that positive manner when you weren't in the room. And you are right. I know when I started business, oh my gosh, this is my 31st year, I used to talk about women in business, and I'd be really held down by other women going, I don't know why you're banging on about that. And or, that very much let's pull up the ladder behind us instead of being there. And to me, that is so important, isn't it? Is that support. It's absolutely
absolutely.
Yeah, it
Mm.
can make such a difference. Those lean in circles with global,
Yeah.
they're fantastic. My very first one was 2019. I was at the G2E conference in Vegas, and I attended one of the women in gaming's breakfast, and they had that. Oh, and it was amazing. I was speaking at the conference there, and then just having that opportunity the next day to have breakfast and from women from, they were consultants like me to the industry, or they were into the industry, but there was hundreds and hundreds of women in this room. And just I don't know whether you use the cards as well, those lean in circle cards to start conversations. Fantastic. Just a really good way. So talking about, you made that comment about diversity, Michelle, and inclusive environments are really important. And it's been a nice thing to have with a lot of companies, a few years ago. Oh, yes, we're all inclusive, we're diversified. But are they actually putting that into place? And it certainly sounds like you are doing it, because just having it in your employee handbook or having it on your website is one thing. Is actually living and breathing diversity in that and being inclusive. So, in your experience, how can women leaders contribute to creating more inclusive and diverse work environments? What strategies have you employed to foster inclusivity within your teams or your organizations?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You can't just have a policy. It needs to be lived and it needs to be felt.
Mm.
And I was actually reflecting with a colleague the other day that we haven't experienced sexual harassment in our industry for a very long time, even though, it was absolutely prevalent. And we wondered if it was because we were older and because we were in senior positions. So it's really important for us to check in with younger and more junior potential staff to make sure that they're feeling in the same way, because sometimes a policy written, that it could be seen as a tick box, and we absolutely don't want it to be that.
No.
I was also reflecting, actually, Michelle, our discussion last year when one of the panelists was talking about her experience and about how that particular organisation in Australia didn't even have a policy, which did surprise me. And I suppose what's happening now with some of the things in the US and some of the policies that are coming up of taking away DE&I, I think those of us who truly value and believe it need to work harder than ever. But some of the things I've done is to have courage to actually constructively challenge some things that when I don't think that they are right. As I mentioned earlier, fairness is one of my triggers. So if I notice something that I don't think is fair or right, I will speak up. It's important to get involved in networking in groups and initiatives.
Yes.
I am the executive sponsor of Winning Women, which is SkyCity's employee resource group, promoting the advancement of women in our business. And that organisation's done some fantastic work. And before I was in the role as well, we put in place a menopause policy. And it's something that it exists. It's shared with men and women leaders across the business, so they understand what it's like if one of their staff members is going through that. So that whole thing about showing people it's okay to be vulnerable is important too, and being genuinely open to other views.
Yeah.
Like we talked about bringing their whole self to work. That means actually understanding that people are different and that people will think differently from what I think, as an example, and that's all okay. So at SkyCity, we've got heaps actually. We're really proud of what we offer. We've got Sky Flex, which is our flexible working policy. We have a rainbow tick. We have gender neutral bathrooms. We call them inclusive bathrooms. We have breastfeeding rooms. We have prayer rooms. So it's really important that we just even last week, or actually earlier this week, unfortunately I missed it because I was unwell, but we had a Pacifica employee resource group here, and bringing some delicious treats for our team to enjoy, so we could, acknowledge our Pacifica staff. We have Māori groups as well, and every single official event that we have at SkyCity, we open with a karakia because that's so important to us. So as you mentioned, it's not just good enough to write it and to pick the box. You actually need to have policies that people can feel.
Yes, yes. And that they can feel and see. And I know, you've mentioned there your different rooms and that openness for those that from within your borders and beyond that feel that they are a part of it. Talking about menopause, this seems to be the conversation that I've been having with a number of senior executive women here on the Eastern Seaboard, literally in the last few months. And I've known them since they were quite young, over these last 30 years. So they're all coming in around that same point. And I have a bit of a chuckle because they were thinking, oh, yes. And I said, yes, well, it could be years, it's just not going to be a fleeting moment, but everybody's very different. But it's
Yes.
menopause, but it was also something that I went through many years ago when I first started my business. I lost my mum to cancer, and then my father when I had two very, very small children, and by myself, and my father a number of years later. And I started to see the impact, particularly of aging parents, particularly when my father was older, on the impact that it was having me when I was at that premium of my career in my business. But a lot of the people's parents weren't as old as mine, so they're only starting to go through it now. And I think that has got to be looked at in the workplace, because I don't know whether you've experienced it, Michelle, but having, looking for places for them to be, whether it's home care, whether it's retirement village, does it mean selling the family home? Who does all the responsibility come down to? For the most cases, it's usually if there is one daughter or whoever. I was having a conversation with a client the other day, and they were a male, and they said, well, I've been given the duty because I'm not married and don't have children. So the rest of the siblings have said, well, you've got no responsibilities on a weekend. So I think that is another part that we should be looking at in the workplace, apart from all the wonderful things you've got there.
Yeah,
Also,
I think you're right. And I think that's where that flexibility and treating people as individual comes in. We have really great
yes.
parental leave policies for parents, and acknowledging that the male or the female can take leave. But you're right, at any stage. And there's lots of people in our business who are not parents, but they have other responsibilities
Yes. Yeah.
which are just as important. So it's just finding the way to be flexible to be able to provide what they need.
And getting them to speak up and ask for it. I think that, and so when
Absolutely.
they can see it's happening, then it gives them more confidence to say, oh, can I reach out? As a woman, we tend to burn the candle at both ends. I know you said, you've had this amazing career and having a family, holding a role that is demanding of our time that we love. And also we have life outside work, being a partner, a mother, a friend, an aunt, or a daughter. Achieving a balance between leadership responsibilities and personal well-being is essential. What strategies do you use to maintain your own well-being while effectively leading your team? How can organizations better support women leaders in achieving this balance?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I don't always succeed at this.
Yeah, let's be honest. Oh, it's a great thing to have. Doesn't always
Yeah.
achieve.
I earlier when you said you don't have balance in work and life, because sometimes we talk about that work and life are different things, whereas work is part of life, isn't it? So
Yes.
it's actually part of it. We're still alive when we're here, thankfully.
Hopefully,
Um,
yes.
yeah. And fully engaged as
Yes.
well. So I think it's important. One thing that's worked for me is surrounding myself with really good people at work and at home. So at home, and I'm very lucky, and I know this is not an experience that everyone is able to have, but I have been lucky enough to have my husband, who's been a stay-at-home dad. So
Right.
we've got three children now. My son is nearly 20, and my daughter's got two daughters. One is nearly 18 and then nearly 16. So obviously 19, 17, 15. But yeah, since they've been little, he's been a stay-at-home dad. So I've been very lucky to have that support. So, and I can only really theoretically relate, but to what it must be like to having both parents working and that pressure. I do make sure that I listen really carefully to those people and put myself in their shoes when they're telling me how difficult that is. But I've been very lucky. I suppose the flip side of that for me though is I still have had that guilt that you sometimes get, that I've missed important things. When my daughter was sick, as an example, I did have a thought, would this have happened if I was at home too? Haven't I paid her enough attention? So all of those things that no one else would ever say to you that you say that I was just saying to myself,
Yeah.
which, was also puts a lot of pressure on. So sometimes we're trying to be everything to everyone. And I think it's okay to not be perfect.
Mm.
And I'm a recovering perfectionist, so that's a little bit challenging for me. I'm not always recovering. I sometimes regress. Um, but I think it's really important to not be too hard on yourself, to ask other people for help to get that balance. And
Mm.
I also think it's important at work not to block your time with meetings.
Yes.
You don't have to be involved in everything. You can delegate things. You can say
Yeah.
no to things. But if
Mm.
you're involved in back-to-back meetings through the day, you don't have any time to plan, any time to think. So I always schedule time to plan and to think. And then I always build some time in at home as well, where I've joined the gym again, which I'm thrilled about, where I get to do some exercise, walk the dog, which is something for me. And I try, and I do not always succeed at this. Everyone says it, so I'm going to say it, but I don't always. I'm not the best at it. Try to be present with wherever you are. Try to give them as much attention. So make sure it's quality time. It may not be lots and lots of time, but it should be quality time.
Mm. And that's so true. And it is that guilt of motherhood at times, and it's hard because as you said, I'm sure your friends or your work peers or anybody said to you, oh, it's what goes on in our head, doesn't it? But and thank you for acknowledging, your partner and having that scenario. But that would have been a deep conversation. I know, I have a number of women in business and their partners have done the same. And I've got a very good friend. She's actually my business coach. And it wasn't until, her boys are nearly at the end of high school now, and her husband was away, and the kids are a bit younger. She had to make a sandwich, and she said, "I don't know how to make it." Like,
I
I
must.
mean,
Yeah,
but it was just one of those. Okay, so what's the schedule? Because she'd all, her partner, her husband had all those,
mm,
had everything running. So there are
yeah.
those moments that you can.
He he does a great job. He did though go mountain biking today, and Rotorua is about an hour away, and he took
Right.
my car keys in his pocket, so he didn't quite succeed today. But he
Yes.
does a great job.
Well, like us all, we can forget sometimes, but it's just acknowledging that we at times put pressure on ourselves that doesn't need to be there. And I liked how you said, delegation is so important. Having
Yeah.
back-to-back meetings, you're not giving yourself enough time to just for your brain to pause. You're just going from one thing to another. And delegation to me is all about trusting somebody else,
Mm,
and therefore you start to build that team.
yeah.
So you're obviously an inspiration to many in your organization and further afield, either whether it's global women or I think you mentioned at the start you were in a group with a group of women from a whole lot of different businesses. Was that correct when that lady had made that comment in your book? Or was that just
Yes.
women in gaming?
Yes.
Yes.
No, that's right. No, it was a whole lot of different businesses, three
Yes.
breakthrough leaders. Yes.
Yeah, so that once again, I'm sure a lot of people look to you, Michelle, and acknowledge, the achievements that you've made. But where do you get your inspiration from?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's seeing others succeed
Mm.
from my family as well. And I even reflect because I reflect on my growing up, my upbringing actually, because my parents got divorced when I was quite young and was reliant on my mum. And I was so into horses. I wanted a horse no matter what. And we didn't have a lot of money, but we managed to, I had a horse and I remember my mum and my dad helping out, and we were going to horse shows and all sorts of things. So sometimes it's my family,
Yeah.
and then when I look at my children, they're my inspiration because from my upbringing, it was a great one, it was a happy one, but I
Mm.
always wanted more for my own children.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons I've strived so hard. And earlier on, was such a perfectionist and so hard on myself because I always wanted that. I was the first in my family to go to university, as an example, and it's doing it for my family. That's what
Yeah.
inspires me, and then seeing others succeed.
Mm.
And I think just being in nature and the beauty of that. I'm a Libra, so I love beauty, and I
Yes.
could spend ages looking at a sunset or at a beautiful full moon.
Mm.
Those sorts of things do inspire me.
And isn't that lovely? Just looking at that full moon where you can, as you mentioned before about being present and just having that moment just to stop, just to admire nature in its full beauty is just beautiful. So you've shared with us your amazing journey, Michelle, and I thank you so much for that. Part of this series about women in leadership is to show what they've achieved, but also those that they have inspired. So just a couple of little fun questions now on the side, getting away from work when you say you do have some time to yourself or your family. Have you read any books or any podcasts, that you absolutely love listening to that, it could well still be with work or just something that's fun?
One that was fun actually. I usually in my downtime, so I like to really relax. So I love music. Like when
Mm.
I met Dean, he was in a band, and we're really into original and love music. So I usually listen to music when I'm trying to escape, or I
Mm.
read a book like a murder mystery. So I've read just about every Anne Cleeves and Louise Penny books as an example. I just love those.
Please.
But
She's
one
my
of the
absolute favorite.
Uh, one of the podcasts that I really enjoyed was actually, it came out of COVID. It was by Josh Homme, who's the singer of Queens of the Stone Age.
Okay.
And it was a really cool podcast, just lots of fun music. He was really funny. And again, it was light. So I like to relax when I have downtime. So I like things that are light. I prefer to see a comedy rather than a serious movie, as an example. So but there are some books and things that have really inspired me as well. Like I really like The Principles in Thrive by Ariana Huffington, and of
Mm.
course the Sheryl Sandberg Lean In book. That's
Yes.
the foundation of the Lean In circles that global gaming women offer.
Mm.
So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. Great books. And yes, hang these is my favorite for listeners who are trying to work out what books, who are they? It's the Vera series and
yes,
it's the Shetland series. And I watch all of them on like repeat. I've got all their books. I absolutely love her style of writing. And sometimes my husband says to me, "Haven't you seen this episode before?" I said, "I may have, but I can never remember who the murderer is." I just and that's my downtime. You
mm,
race around all the time and I can
yeah,
sit there and just enjoy it. And when it's a show or whether it's a book and I think reading is like the best thing. You're never lonely if you've got a book in your handbag or your suitcase or whatever it is. But just to have somebody that you can really relax and enjoy the
absolutely.
story as it unfolds is fantastic. Um, but before we go, or perhaps I should have asked this question to you first. What do you see? Any trends that you see? I know I put initially in the questions 5 to 10 years. Well, yeah, trends happen like now, don't they? I mean, we've seen the impact of AI, particularly, but also, just the trends of the multi-generational workplace. Is there something that you can see that's happening in the industry, perhaps only in New Zealand or globally at all?
Yeah, I think it's more in Australasia. I mean,
Mm.
obviously our industry is going through a pretty challenging time, particularly in the
Yes.
casino sector with all of the
Mm.
regulatory matters that have been raised. So I think it's a time when it's a wee bit challenging actually to attract the people that you want in some areas of the industry, because it's not as glamorous as it was when I first started at Christchurch
Mm.
Casino. I mean, I had visions of Las Vegas and and it's not, and James Bond and what I think a trend will be, and I think we will get to, is a rebalance. And I think we will bring back the glamour, and I think we'll get the compliance aspect right.
Mm.
But we'll get the balance of caring for our customers and entertaining our customers as well. And I
Yeah.
think that will be amazing. So key trends for me are still compliance. That's not going to go away.
Mm.
Hopefully, we'll see a leveling of the playing field as well across the industry. So
Mm.
we're caring for our customers in the same way. I think we'll be customer and community centric.
Yes.
There will be digitalisation. That was this, you said AI, but mobile wallets, all those sorts of things.
Yes.
Omnichannels potentially in New Zealand. We're looking at licensing online gambling in New Zealand.
Mm.
So there's the omnichannel opportunity of a customer being able to play land-based and online with the
Mm.
same company, with SkyCity, hopefully in the future. And that entertainment venues, I think, will offer a lot more than just gambling as well. And we've certainly seen that trend in Vegas, and I think that's something we'll see
Yes.
more of in Australasia too.
Mm. You're right. It is that entertainment, and I've been to Vegas, and I'm sure you have multiple times, and it is that entertainment. That whole precinct, you can get outside the strip, and then it's a whole different world. But on that strip, it is about the entertainment and people just gathering together, seeing all the bright lights and walking a very long way. Everything always seems really close in Vegas till you start to walk.
That's true.
That's a very, very long way. Before we finish up, is there anything about your journey in becoming a leader that I didn't ask that I perhaps should have, Michelle?
Oh, I think you've done a great job, Michelle. Thank you. I just thought it'd be a good opportunity to reinforce some of the things that I've learned.
Yes.
And I learned a few years ago following a restructure of my role that I have transferable skills. I moved into the hotel part of the business, and that you don't need to know everything to be successful.
Mm.
I learned to say yes to opportunities. I had this amazing opportunity to go to Queenstown a few years ago, and certainly don't regret that. Most of all, I learned that I was a better leader by putting aside my mask, as I
Yes.
mentioned before, and being vulnerable and getting to know myself and what triggered me. I think that's important. You've got to
Yeah.
know yourself to lead others well, and to understand the impact that you have on them. And I also learned that it's good to put aside your ego, that often when you do get triggered, it's because your ego is talking. So it's good to put that aside and to lead more with your head and your heart.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite quotes I thought I would share is actually from Cinderella's mother, and it's have courage and be kind.
Mm.
And I think it's important to have courage to say you don't know something, but you'll learn. Have courage to employ someone who might know more than you.
Mm.
Have courage to put forward your ideas and to speak up if something isn't right. And most of all, I think it's important, with the kindness, to be kind to yourself,
Mm.
as much as it is to be kind to others.
What a beautiful
Thank
quote.
you.
Thank you so much for that, Michelle. That was and it's so true. It's that courage to do all those points that you've said, but it's also being kind to
Mhm.
those that may not, as I said, they don't always see within them what they have to offer, but also to be kind to each other when, yeah, whatever we are weathering our own personal storms, how that plays out in the workplace. And then, of course, apart from our teams that we work with, our customers that come through the door, and not always knowing what their story is, but how can we be kind to them and perhaps even show that courage in having conversations with them and helping them, whatever it may be in life. And it could be just a simple, gee, you're looking nice today, or I'm glad that you're here, or whatever it may be. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, Michelle. I'm sure we could go on for a lot longer, but I've really enjoyed hearing and you sharing your insights of being a leader in the gaming and casino industry, but also the relevance of how it is important to be a leader and to have those men and other women in our corner to support us, even when we're not in the room, and be advocates for us. Thank you so much, Michelle. I've really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit more in today's podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me in this week's podcast. Wasn't that absolutely fantastic? I really enjoyed interviewing Michelle Baillie, taken so many notes. So let me ask you two quick questions. How are you amplifying your role in your organization? And what opportunities are you saying yes to? I love the hospitality industry, and over the past 3 decades, whether it's training frontline team members in creating memorable experiences or my signature program, Middle Management Movement, I believe it's an honor and a privilege to work with people, whether it's their first day in the industry or they've been in the careers for a long time. It's the industry to be in. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it to your friends and business associates. And if you really are inclined and you enjoyed it, leave me a review. Take care till next time. Bye.